Hi, friends. It's your girl Harpo. Welcome to this episode of Brown Girl Guild titled Harpo's Worst Date. This episode falls under season 6, and the theme of this season is my love life. And we have very hysterically coined it Harpo's Love Life, a series of misfortunate events. Now, I wanted to share my worst date because what is a season on my love life and my dating life and making fun of it and talking about all the joys, all the hurt, all the pain, all the everything, and not talking about some of the worst dates that I've been on. So I posted on Instagram a few months ago before this episode came out, asking my followers to vote on which date they wanted to hear about. So option one was the date where this misogynistic guy basically yelled at me and talked at me for hours, or the guy that brought his laptop to the date, opened it up mid date, and started to check stocks. And y'all voted both of them. So instead of telling you about one worst date, I'm actually going to tell you about two of my worst dates. The reason that I want to do that is because I really want to share with all of you how ridiculous it actually is out there for real. Like, I know that there's like this like general understanding that dating right now just sucks. I'm going to tell you in this episode in proof that it's true. It does suck. It is so ridiculous. It's so wild. There's so much wild shit out there that happens. And I want y'all to see how horrible it has really been for me, to be honest. Like, I just want you guys to know. I just want to have like a horrible pity party for a second. And then also to say that like it's just so fun. Like these stories are just so fun. They're so funny because some of y'all out here being ridiculous, okay? And if you're gonna be this ridiculous, you're gonna get put in a podcast episode. So I'll tell the story about the misogynistic guy first because that was like the running contender for my worst date for so long until this laptop thing happened. So this date happened many years ago, and I just need to preface all of this by saying that in my life and in the lives of many of my friends, I am the one person who has been on the most number of first dates. Like, there is no one in my life who has been on more first dates than I have. I've been on more first dates than I have fingers and toes. So, back in the day, yeah, I was living in Montreal, and I didn't really date that much in Montreal because, like, I mean, I was just there for like a year and I was like not trying to date. I was there for grad school, but I made a Bumble and I was like looking, and I'm like only exclusively into brown guys. So the pool was like really limited. And there was this one brown guy, and I was like, oh, like, look, there's a brown guy on here. Like, okay, whatever. He was mildly cute. Swiped right on him. We started to talk, set up a date. It's going great, and I could just tell like from the beginning, like this guy was being like a little bit pushy about like where I lived. Like, I lived on my own, and he wanted to know where I lived, and he wanted to like come by and pick me up or whatever. And I'm a smart person, right? So I was like, no, I'm not going to give my address away to a stranger. So I basically set up a meeting point that was like a few like streets down from where I lived. And we met up, like we got an Uber, we went to a restaurant that was like in a different neighborhood. And things were like going like seemingly well, but like as soon as I like saw him, I was like, okay, like actually this is not the vibe, right? So like my intuition immediately was like, there's something off about this guy. So whatever, we like sit down, he had picked a nice Italian restaurant. He knew I liked wine. So like it was going well. And I have to preface all of this by saying that there are some like really harmful things that he said on this date. So like if you get angry or you get upset as you're listening to this episode, feel free to like turn it off, and like you can try and come back to it later. Or if you're like, no, I'm just gonna forward this to the laptop guy, he's a lot safer. So yeah, there was a lot of crazy things that this guy said. So everything was going really well. And, he'd asked me like, okay, like, what do you do for work? Like, what are you in school for? And I had told him that, like my undergrad was in gender studies and gender women's sexuality studies, and that I was doing my master's in education with a concentration in gender and women's studies. And, as you can imagine, as soon as I finished saying that and I was about to catch my breath, he rolled his eyes. He, of course, rolled his eyes. And immediately I was like, oh, this guy just rolled his eyes at me because he's like, oh, I want to date with a feminist. And that's exactly what happened. He took that and oh my God, he unleashed this crazy, weird vengeance that he had against women on me simply because I told him that I was doing women's studies. And the first thing that came out of his mouth was that, I think this was like The Me Too movement had like just sort of happened on social media at that time. Maybe had been like a year into it. And he started to like take digs at it and be like, you women are just like going around, men are just not safe anymore. There's just nothing that we can say and do anymore. And I was like, well, yeah, like it's like you can't do anything and say anything that you want. Nobody can. You can't subject people to harm. And there was one line that I'll never forget. I mean, he was sort of arguing with me about how women lie about sexual violence and domestic violence. And I was just sitting there angry and just trying so hard to understand where he was coming from and just trying to understand like what was even happening, like really trying to process like how did we go from like drinking wine and eating pizza to like you yelling at me? It just didn't make sense to me. And the next thing that he said to me, I'll never forget. We started to talk about, really public profile cases of violence, like men, sort of enacting violence on women. And he said something because we talked about Chris Brown and Rihanna, and he goes, "Well, I just think that if Chris Brown hit Rihanna, it's because she gave him a reason to." I'm just going to pause for effect because when I heard that come out of his mouth, my jaw dropped. I was like, oh my God, I am on a date with the devil. And so it just continued on and on. And it just got worse, right? Like he was a brown guy living in Montreal and he was very disconnected from the Punjabi culture. He didn't speak the language. He didn't really know anything about the culture. He was very disconnected from the actual roots of Punjabi culture. And he proceeded to tell me that he wanted a Punjabi wife because he wanted her to connect her with his culture. And he was placing so much responsibility on this hypothetical Punjabi woman. And he continued to tell me that he had actually only dated and slept with multiple women in his life who were non-brown, who were mostly white, and that he was now ready to settle down with a good Punjabi girl. And I just looked at him and I was like, you're disgusting. Like, this is so stupid. And the worst part about this story is that I was there for 4 hours, y'all. For 4 hours, I just sat there as this guy yelled at me, talked down at me, and tried to like make me feel shitty about my existence, right? So that's the first story. And I'm going to come back to this, okay? So there's like all these layers that we need to unpack, but I'm going to come back to it because I need to tell the second story as well. So the second story is a lot more recent. So, buddy, if you're listening to this, I apologize that I didn't actually tell you to your face that you're a clown and that you have to hear it from a podcast episode. But anyway, there's a guy that I had met on a dating site, and we'd been texting back and forth for a few weeks. I felt really bold and I was like, I hate texting back and forth. Like, that initial like texting talking phase is just so irritating because you're like, I'm just trying to live my life and like work on the day to day. And like, I don't know you enough. So it's like too much emotional involvement to like have to have like a fake text message conversation with you about the weather and also about like what sports team you're going for in the NBA championship. Like it's just so annoying, right? So I remember being really bold and saying to him like, hey, like I think you're cute. Like, I don't like this texting back and forth thing. If you want to meet me, like let's go out. And if we like each other, cool. If not, then we can stop this. And he was like, oh yeah, like of course. Like that's like, yeah, of course, let's go out, da da da. So like I said yes, and a week goes by, and we hadn't really made concrete plans to hang out. And of course, on the 11th hour, on the day that I told him I was free, he calls me and he's like, "Oh, like let's hang out tonight, and like I'd love to see you." Da da da. And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So we made plans. And mind you, fine, like we made plans midday for that evening, but the fact that like he took such a long time to even get back to me, I was like, you know what? I just want to like nip this in the bud. I just want to go see what it's like and then be over with it. But even then, like it felt like an obligation, right? It felt like I wasn't like particularly like excited, enthusiastic about it. I was just trying to do it to get it over with. So we made plans. I show up. I'm sitting there and this buddy is half an hour late. Okay. No text, no call, nothing. Half an hour late. I'm like, you know what? I'm dumb. Why am I sitting here? As I'm about to get up, I get a text message. He's right in the parking lot. I'm like, cool, fine, whatever. It's awkward if I leave now, right? But mind you, in hindsight, he disrespected my time. I should have just gotten up and not given a shit about disrespecting him, right? Comes in, sits down with the laptop case. I'm like, why? Why is it okay? Like, it's like 8 p.m., like 8:30 p.m. on a Friday night. Like, why does this buddy have his laptop? As I'm saying my hellos, he starts to pull his laptop out, starts to put it on the desk, starts to like turn it on. He's got a mouse. He's moving his mouse around. And I'm looking at him. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, am I missing something? Like, does he have to like quickly send an email or something? Like, what is going on? First of all, he was late because he had an incident of road rage. That should have been my fucking red flag number two. I should have just dippity dipped, right? Because I'm not trying to be with anyone that has excessive amounts of road rage. Because if you're driving a car, you're driving a car. Just shut up and stay in your lane. Just don't be angry, right? But this buddy shows up, starts moving his mouse around, starts to tell me that he's going to check his stocks. And he was like, like, I don't really like get any downtime. Like, I'm working all the time. And I was like, okay, well, I can just leave and you can continue to work. I straight up was like, well, we don't have to do this. I'm like, I can just leave, right? Like, that's totally fine. And he's continued to just like check his laptop and like be on like checking his stocks and his investments or whatever. And mind you, like I had to get up and go order like a drink, and it's not about the payment, right? Like it's not about the fact that I had to go pay for his espresso and my tea. It's just like I don't know, like it was just weird. Like he was just so hyper focused on his laptop that like I had to get up and go pay for like our drinks or whatever. There was just no courtesy, no respect involved. And we weren't there for a very long time because the establishment was closing shortly after. But the entire time that we were there, I would be surprised if this guy knew a single fact about me. Okay. I would be surprised if this guy knew anything that I was interested in or why I do what I do or who I am. He didn't know anything, right? He spent the entirety of that exchange. Like, I don't even know if I want to call it a date. I don't even think he considers it a date in his head. But he spent the entirety of that exchange talking to me about his childhood and about the relationship that his mom and dad have, and, how it's impacted him and how, like, all this trauma that he has and da da da. And I'm like sitting there, I'm like, why is this person emotionally dumping on me? Like, it makes no sense to me that this person doesn't know who I am. I barely know this person. And yet they're taking up all this time and space to talk to me about intimate details of their life. And then the place closed. We get up. I should have left a long time ago when, like, the first sight that he was late. And yet, so we walk out of the establishment. We're walking to our car. Gives me a hug, tells me he had a great time. Of course, he fucking did. And he invites me to something on the weekend and then moves on. I never saw him again. I never saw him again. And, we never connected again. And sometimes I'll see him around town, and I just have to pretend like I'm not bothered by the entire situation. I'm not bothered in a way where I'm like bothered because I think I'm like upset that it didn't work out, but bothered because like I just want to like grab him by the ears and be like, that was so stupid. So all that to say that those are two of probably my worst date, stories. I've had multiple other situationships that have not gone right, but to say that those were the most two ridiculous is like an understatement, because they were the two most ridiculous scenarios that I was ever part of. And the reason that I share those two things, right, to get aside from all the funny jokes and like making fun of these clowns, and like truly they were clowns. But like there's two things that were actually not two things. There's multiple things that overlap and were in common with both of those stories. Number one is that I should have left at the first sign that I felt uncomfortable, right? And I think that we have not set ourselves up as a community, as a society, as a world to like exit situations when they don't feel safe and they don't feel comfortable. Like I should have left immediately when that guy started to like, when he rolled his eyes and he said something sideways, I should have been like, that is disrespectful. Goodbye. Right. I should have trusted my intuition enough. And even with a laptop guy, like when he was half an hour late, 15 minutes into him being late, I should have gone, right? I should have gotten up and left and exited. But we do not allow for us to leave environments and situations when we're uncomfortable, right? The second thing that I realized when I look back at these two dates is that I was trying so hard to find the reason and the empathy for both of these people. Like I was like, when the first one was being a misogynistic person and he was like saying all these things to me, and then even the second one when they were emotionally dumping on me, I was like trying to find a reason to like care, right? Like I was sitting there and like trying my best to be this like really good person and like be empathetic and hold space for them, when really, like, I don't owe them that. Like, I mean, yes, at a human level, if they were like going through something really bad, I would be there for them, but I didn't sign up for that, right? I signed up for a really social recreational activity, aka a date, and to have fun. And I'm there and I'm like your therapist, or like I'm your springboard or your soundboard for something else that's going on in your mind, right? But I was trying so hard to find empathy when I really didn't need to, right? And the other thing that I think about constantly when I think about these two dates is like, why did that happen to me? Like, why did I get hit with all that bullshit? Like, why did that happen? Right? Like, do I have fudu written on my forehead? Like, Do I have fudor on my forehead that I just attract this? Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me, right? And also, like, for the most part, I'm gonna use this, I'm gonna use my own example and my own case, right? I am this is like the experience that I've had because I'm dating men. I don't understand why men conflate dating and therapy. Like, I just don't understand why they conflate the two, right? And in my case, that's happened multiple times where, even if the dates were not this bad, and even aside from these two dates, there have been so many dates that I've been on where I barely got a word in, right? Like, I tweeted this once. It was like, the real pandemic is men who only talk about themselves on the first date. And that is so true. Like, I that's one of my biggest red flags. Like, my friends and I have this thing where, like, the date was great and like he was cool, but all he did was talk about himself, and he's charismatic and he's enthusiastic, but all he did was talk about himself, and that's a big no-no. Like, I will literally not see someone again if that's all they did on the first date. So, going back to my point, why do men conflate dating and therapy? Like, why is that the same thing? You're on a date with an attractive woman. I'm hot. I get it. Why am I your therapist, right? You should pay $150 to somebody else for that, right? I'm sitting here. First of all, I'm not getting paid. I'm not getting laid. And I'm just sitting here to listen to you talk about your feelings. It makes no sense, right? I think we do that so much as women. We're like, we'll act as the emotional support in the lives of the men that we meet, we interact with, because like we think that's our job, right? And I will say here right now with my entire chest, men do not have enough relationships in their lives where they can actually, in a healthy way, in a very productive, conducive way, talk about their feelings with people who are actually in their lives, right? Like, I don't go around talking about my feelings with everybody because I have like an arsenal of people in my life that I actually can vent to and talk to, and they're there for me. But the patriarchy and misogyny and like homophobia has really stripped men of like really like meaningful, reciprocal, empathetic, like relationships where they can talk about their feelings. And so they see a woman that's like mildly interested in them, and they're like, oh, there it is, a vessel for all my feelings. And then they just dump it. They just leave it there, right? And it's such a disservice to us. Like, sometimes I walk around carrying all these emotions of men in my life that are actually not even mine. Like, it'll take me 3, 4 weeks to be like, that feeling wasn't even mine, right? Like, he left it in me when I met him. And that's just not okay. And it comes from an empathetic place for me, for sure. It comes from a place of guilt, right? Like, I know that I do that with my father. I do that with my brother. I feel like I'm always like, well, they don't know how to feel their feelings, so I'm going to feel their feelings for them. And that has replicated, and that's like repeated itself over and over again in romantic relationships with men, and then in platonic relationships with men, where I just feel like there's an unequal imbalance of give and take, right? And all it does is really create a sense of like anger in me. It creates a sense of resentment in me, because I'm like, well, I didn't have to be there. Like, I really don't like that I spent 4 hours of my life like listening to this guy talk about his like feelings, when I didn't sign up for it. When we don't actually have that sort of trust and bond, right? Like, that we haven't signed up for that. And then all it also does is leave me feeling really hopeless, like really discouraged, because I'm like, bruh, I don't want to go on a date ever again. Like, this guy pulled out his fucking laptop. Like, I don't like your laptop was more interesting than me. Like, I'm a really cute, fun, hot, sexy person, bro. Like, that's just ridiculous. So it is really discouraging. You don't feel like going on dates because you're like, what's the point? Like, what is the point? I'm going to come back from all of this having lost rather than gained. So then what's the point, right? So what's the lesson in all of this? There's so many lessons in this. Number one, always follow your intuition, right? Like, I think for the first guy, I was just swiping, and I obviously just, chose the first guy that was like remotely interesting, but I wasn't excited about it. And then even the second guy, like, I felt like I was just doing it for the sake of doing it, to get it out of my system and to just like, give it a go. And I felt really obligated. But, intuitively, I knew that I wasn't interested and that it wasn't going to be a good time. So I should have listened to that intuition. Second, I should have felt bold enough to leave. I should have felt strong enough to been like, this isn't it. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm going to cut this short, but I'm going to find my own way home. Because, like, realistically, they're not in my life, right? This guy from Montreal, like, I don't even know his last name, right? Like, I don't even like remember anything about this guy. And then the one that's local that I went on a date with few months ago, I mean, he might, I don't know. Like, I don't think he actually knows who the hell I am. I don't even think he listened enough to know that I have a podcast. I don't think he'll ever listen. But all that to say that they're both not in my life right now, right? So even if I had gotten up and walked away, it's not like they would have been able to track me down or trace me down, right? I mean, of course, like if I felt like I was really unsafe and that it was harmful, perhaps I wouldn't have done that, but that would have been up to me to gauge, right? Like I could have done something at least, right? And so I think at the end of the day, like, it's not to say that I'm going to stop dating. It's not like I'm not going to stop going on dates, but, I'm going to start implementing a 10-step program. Truly, I am. I know it's going to sound ridiculous and it's going to sound like excessive, but given my history, I think I'm going to start implementing a 10-step program, right? And the 10-step program isn't going to be like, you can't talk to me, like you can't go out with me until 10 weeks. I'm not going to do that, right? But I think I need to start having a list of standards, like I feel like I have so many standards in so many different places in my life. I have such a high standard for myself. It's like such a disservice, like to not have a standard that's even remotely around the same ballpark for the people that I'm going to date. So I don't really know what the contents of my 10-step program are just quite yet. I am very willing to take recommendations. If you have any things that I should be looking out for and keeping in mind as part of this 10-step program before I start dating and going out with people and boys exactly, my DMs are open. You should hit me up. And I am going to say it to the universe. I'm holding a malachite in my hand. I'm manifesting this. Please, God, do not ever let me go on a bad date ever again because I am tired.